Thank you for inviting me and happy to join you all, although I wasn't here from the morning. So, we have three panelists for this session. So, I'll introduce the panelists and the topic briefly. So, first, we have two panelists who are physically here. The third one will be online. So, we'll invite the two panelists who are here physically with me, Smriti and Bhavani, also to join on the stage. So the topic is reclaiming space, and I want to put the word civic space to that. So reclaiming, I think, implies that we had it and we have lost it, or we are in the process of losing it, or it's declining. So I think our challenges that we will discuss will be about, the struggles to reclaim it, what we had or what we are lacking at the moment. And there are many struggles that are ongoing, and we will have I think specific perspectives from Sri Lanka and Pakistan, and then we will have a more broader South Asian overview. We will also, I think, touch on different aspects of civic space in the course of the sharing, particularly on freedom of expression, assembly, and association, which I think are the cornerstones of civic space. So I'll go towards introducing the panelists that we have here with us, the three panelists. So first, from Sri Lanka is Bhavani Fonseca here. She's a lawyer and also senior researcher at the Center for Policy Alternatives. She has published books and been writing articles, particularly related to transitional justice, but on a range of issues about human rights, governance, democracy. She has also been engaging with the Sri Lankan state at particular times in particular ways, and we will talk about this probably later, as an advisor to the Consultation Task Force on Reconciliation Mechanisms back around 2016, and around 2017-18 also in the drafting committee of the National Human Rights Action Plan. As a lawyer, she has been very active as well, particularly in public interest litigation cases. And she has been engaging in a lot of advocacy at the international level as well, particularly with the United Nations. So that's a brief introduction. I think you have a longer description to read. And Mavi is a Pakistani human rights defender and journalist. She's joining us online. Hopefully, she'll be with us fully without any problems with the connections. She's currently the consulting editor for New Global Waves. Formerly, she was a senior manager for United Nations and European Union programs on democracy and gender in Pakistan. And in 2010, she was given the National Human Rights Award by the President of Pakistan. And she has also taught about human rights and journalism at university level. Smriti, the far corner, is the regional director of Amnesty International South Asia. She was also formerly with Amnesty International India, and also with MSF, where she was dealing with campaigns and communications, and also deputy project coordinator for the COVID-19 emergency interventions in India. So I'd like to start probably with Mavi from Pakistan. She's online. Hopefully, we'll have the panelists speaking for about approximately 6 minutes the first time around. And then we will have some time for discussion, and then maybe right at the end, a couple of minutes for each panelist to respond. So Mavi, over to you.
So thank you very much, esteemed colleagues and distinguished guests. Very good morning, rather good afternoon, considering the time difference. It's an honor to speak to you at this summit, where we've gathered to address some of the most pressing challenges facing our global community today, as this summit explores the intersection of health and human rights. I'm reminded of the critical role that civil society plays in safeguarding the dignity, freedom, and well being of individuals, particularly in societies where these values are under threat. In Pakistan, where I have dedicated much of my work, civil society has been both a beacon of hope and a battleground, striving to uphold the rights of the marginalized in increasingly difficult circumstances. In Pakistan, civil society has been pivotal in shaping the nation's political and social landscape. Historically, the civil society organizations or CSOs or NGOs have been instrumental in advocating for human rights, democracy, especially democracy and social justice, often in the face of authoritarian regimes and political instability. From the independence in 1947 to the to the present time, various pro-democracy movements against military dictatorships in 1970s, 1980s, early 2000s, even now, civil society has consistently challenged the oppressive systems and advocated for the rights of the marginalized communities. You might have heard about movements like the feminist movement, which was led by Women's Action Forum and Sindhyani Tehreek, and many other smaller regional movements in the 1980s. The lawyers, more known lawyers movement in 2007, Aurat March and Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, and students movements from 2018 up till now. All of these exemplify the power and influence of civil society in Pakistan. In recent years, civil society has continued to play a critical role in promoting democratic values and social justice. And these organizations and individuals have been active in areas such as women's rights, freedom of expression, especially freedom of expression, which has been a bigger challenge in over last few years. The minority rights, also big challenge. And often these individuals and organizations have been operating in environments hostile to dissent and critical discourse. So, despite increasing restrictions on civil liberties and the overall shrinking space for civil society, these organizations and individuals have persisted in their efforts to hold the state accountable and advocate for the protection of human rights. However, the dissenting views have faced escalating, restrictions and pressures that have severely curtailed their ability to operate freely and effectively. This clampdown is part of a broader trend of shrinking civic space where dissent is stifled and fundamental freedoms like freedom of expression, association, freedom of information, freedom of assembly, these are all increasingly under threat. If we talk of the legal and regulatory measures, so the legal environment overall for CSOs in Pakistan has become increasingly restrictive with the introduction of new laws and the misuse of existing ones to limit free opinion and expression. For example, the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act of 2016, PECA, we call it PECA. Initially, it was framed to combat cybercrimes, but it has been extensively used to target journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens from civil society organizations for expressing dissenting views online. And additionally, there has been Citizens Protection Rules 2020. The exact name of these rules is Citizens Protection Against Online Harm Rules 2020. They sought to impose stringent controls on social media platforms, requiring them to remove content deemed unlawful by the government, effectively curbing the speech online, free speech online. These laws, combined with the increasing use of sedition charges and anti-terrorism laws against dissenters, have created a repressive legal environment and stifles, free expression and undermine democratic discourse in Pakistan. Now, censorship and media crackdowns have also become increasingly systematic, reflecting the state's concerted efforts to suppress independent media, including online platforms. The government's use of legal, regulatory, and extra legal, extrajudicial measures to control the media landscape has had a profound effect and profound consequences for freedom of expression, even the quality of journalism and overall state of democracy and human rights in Pakistan. So the traditional media outlets, particularly those that are critical of the government or the state or they're reporting on sensitive issues such as corruption, human rights abuses, especially the military affairs, the violation by the military establishment. They have faced intense pressure through the withdrawal of advertising revenues, hitting their financial source resources, threatening their journalists, outright bans on their broadcasts and distribution. The closure of media outlets like the news in past, now it's not closed, but their broadcast, the broadcast of the prominent news channels like Geo News or more recently Airwire News, they exemplify states' efforts to silence dissenting views. The erosion of media independence directly impacts the quality of journalism, making investigative journalism increasingly risky and rare, which in turn leaves citizens less informed and more susceptible to propaganda. And we have seen it during the pandemic, especially. So this undermining of press freedom and narrowing of public sphere poses significant threats to the state of democracy in Pakistan. As a free and vibrant media is, essential for holding power to account, or fostering transparency and enabling informed public participation in governance. In 2015, the policy for regulation of international non-governmental organizations or INGOs has specifically targeted CSOs by imposing stringent, requirements on securing foreign funding. Now, this has been very important. Many INGOs have faced delays in registration, arbitrary rejections, or have been forced to even shut down their operations entirely, as we could see in the cases of Action Aid and Open Society Foundation, which were expelled from the country in 2018. These measures often justified under the guise of national security or countering terrorism, effectively stifling the work of CSOs, especially, particularly those that are engaged in human rights and advocacy. Now, this I don't know how much time I have left with, but I will just take 2 more minutes. Harassment and intimidation of civil society actors that I specifically want to talk about have also become alarmingly common in Pakistan. Human rights defenders, journalists, and activists frequently face threats. Not just threats, but arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearances, and even extrajudicial killings in extreme cases. For instance, in 2018, Raza Khan, a peace activist, was forcibly disappeared. Many others were also. After, he in his case, he organized a discussion on extremism. So after that, he got disappeared. And that case remained unresolved for a long time. It still is. We don't know what happened, although he has come back. Similarly, the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, one of country's leading human rights organizations, has faced repeated harassment. In 2019, HRCP's offices were, raided at one place. It has offices in, countrywide. So at one place, their office was raided by security forces, and its members have been subjected to surveillance threats, especially smear campaigns, to discredit their work. These actions are not limited to state actors. It's also very important to recognize that the extremist groups and militant organizations also target CSOs and human rights, individuals who advocate for human rights and who challenge their ideology. Such incidents create an overall atmosphere of fear and self-censorship where activists and organizations are forced to weigh the rest of their work against their personal safety. As a result, the dissenting voices are increasingly marginalized, and the space for public debate and critical discourse is shrinking, continuously shrinking, and it is shrinking as we speak. This has implications for the health of Pakistan's democracy and its adherence to human rights standards. The diversity and vibrance of Pakistan civil society are under constant threat and profound threat. The ability of CSOs to act as, and the media to act as watchdogs, and to hold the government accountable and to provide the essential services to marginalized communities is being systematically undermined. This shrinking space for civil society not only weakens the democratic governance, but also diminishes the capacity for societal progress and reform. In the long run, these restrictive policies and laws risk isolating Pakistan from the global community and civil society and human rights organizations, international human rights organizations. They further entrenching the country's challenges in governance and social justice. These policies have also led to decline in international support. That's what I want to say. International support and international partnership, as the foreign donors and foreign international partner organizations are now increasingly wary of engaging with Pakistani NGOs that face stringent governmental controls. The threat of having their projects shut down or their funds frozen has made it difficult for NGOs to maintain long-term partnerships with international actors, further isolating them, reducing their capacity to operate, effectively in Pakistan and helping people. This isolation has been particularly damaging for NGOs working on democracy promotion, which often, these organizations rely on international networks and support for expertise, for resources, for money, even for advocacy at the global level. Uh, and these organizations do not find much resources locally. So they are dependent, almost totally dependent on the international funding, which has reduced. And this reduction in international engagement has limited the ability of these NGOs to bring international attention to issues in Pakistan and to leverage, global pressure to effect change. The long-term impact of these restrictions and all this environment threatens not just the NGOs themselves, but also the broader democratic and human rights landscape in the country. But despite all these restrictive and
Mami, I'm
oppressive
sorry, we had to
circumstances,
wind up soon.
what we do, just last sentence, I'm just last sentence. What we do is we persist and we do it so well because the journey to reclaim our spaces is long and arduous, but it is a journey we must undertake together. In our collective action, we find the courage to resist, the resolve to persevere, and vision to build a world where every human can live with dignity and freedom. Our future depends on the strength we draw from each other. So it is very important that I wanted to say. Thank you very much and sorry for taking much time.
Thank you, Mavi. We'll go straight to Bhavani.
Thank you, Ruki, and thank you to MSF for inviting me and having this panel. It's also good to reconnect with MSF 15 years later because during the war, we were having conversations with MSF on humanitarian space, and now it's very similar issues. And listening to Marve, I think what we can take out of this is that we are seeing very similar trends in South Asia, very much in terms of populist leaders, authoritarian governance, the whole securitization of governance and monitoring. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, the common links and common practices, trends in the region. Now, I've been asked to speak on Sri Lanka and just very briefly maybe to capture some of the key issues and challenges in terms of civic space. First, I'll deal with some of the challenges and then maybe try to end with some of the positives, is the governance model. And in terms of a very executive heavy, very militarized, and in that, we need to recognize Sri Lanka and many of the countries in the region are coming from very much cycles of violence. And that has normalized this approach of national security, that everything is being used in terms of justifying it's a national security issue or it's a public order. And in Sri Lanka, just in the last couple of years, we've seen this practice over and over again. Most recently, during the economic crisis, we saw particular laws being used, such as the PTA, the penal code, to stop protests and arrest protesters. It was used even more recently in terms of shutting down social media spaces, civic spaces. And I'll speak to some of the laws that have also come about. But also we saw during the pandemic, I think this is something very important to also think about in this setting, is how public health and a health emergency was used to restrict certain freedoms. So in Sri Lanka, as seen in many other countries, we had lockdowns. And many of us question the legality of these lockdowns because what the state did was use the health crisis to justify shutting down spaces, including freedom of expression. And many of these practices, not just during the pandemic, but even before, during the war, during the economic crisis, was very much justifying a particular narrative that is very much informed, designed by the state. So one couldn't question what national security was. One couldn't question what public order was. One couldn't question what a health emergency was because the government really said this is for the safety of the people. Anyone critiquing was seen as a traitor, a terrorist. I mean, many of us have been called these names. And so that framing, the one who frames these narratives, who pushes particular positions need to be questioned. Now, there was also the law that provided for this kind of practices, and we have, and I think in the region, we have these terrorist emergency laws that are being used willy-nilly without very limited checks. And this whole kind of the emergencies are really a state of exception. Any lawyer will say that. But what has happened is the state of exception has become normalized in this region and in Sri Lanka, particularly. Over the decades, we have seen this resorting to terrorist security laws that has become just the norm. So during the economic crisis, I mean, this was economic crisis where people were staying in line to get essential items. Emergency was imposed 3 times. All 3 times we have gone to court on these issues. And this was merely to prevent protests from happening. There were bans on social media or what could be said on social media. There were shutdowns on particular sites, and that continues in terms of using particular narratives. Most recently, we have seen laws, new laws being introduced, and I'm looking at the laws because we've gone to court challenging many of these laws. But what happens when the government uses a particular frame to justify bringing very top heavy laws is this whole narrative of national security, public order. And it's very hard to challenge if you have institutions that are also not independent. So we get to the whole issue of the structure of the state and institutions that should be a check on the executive and the military. Now, when we've had particular laws, most recently we've had the Online Safety Act that was brought in this year in Sri Lanka. This is seen as trying to control social media spaces. Now, why is this such a key priority for a country that's going through an economic recovery stage needs to be questioned. And it goes back to the whole point. A lot of what the mobilization that we saw in 2022, even before, but particularly the citizen mobilization that pushed back on the government of the day in 2022 and brought in regime change was very much energized in social media. So there is a fear among the government, the state apparatus, the security apparatus that online spaces need to be controlled, monitored, and limited. So the Online Safety Act that was brought in this year, and there's another law called the Anti-Terror Act, which is before Parliament right now. These are all very much giving very strong powers to the executive arm with very limited checks and balances. So that's kind of the challenge in Sri Lanka in terms of a very strong executive, very limited checks and balances in terms of independent institutions being able to push back. We have some judicial activism, but I would personally say it's not enough. But we also have these laws which have normalized certain practices. Now, the positive, very briefly, is that we have in Sri Lanka very resilient and robust civil society and media. And I mean, basically, actors who push back on authoritarian militarized governance trends. And that's heartening, because what we see in India, what we've seen in Bangladesh and other countries, the common link in a way is this pushback, the citizen questioning, challenging, and really critiquing and pushing back on these trends. So what we saw in 2022, this massive people's mobilization didn't happen in a vacuum. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, we saw citizens mobilizing. We had the Mothers' Front on enforced disappearances. We had the farmers' protest. So across Sri Lanka, over the decades, that activism has remained and continues to be a key issue in terms of checking these proposed laws and executive powers. But my fear is that the narratives are becoming much more, and the spaces used by the state, by international actors, by the security apparatus is becoming also very clever in how to push back, how to monitor, how to challenge, how to monitor how funds come into local organizations. That's a huge challenge in terms of using different ways of trying to restrict, limit civic space. So the challenges are many in Sri Lanka, but I will want to always say that there is always a glimmer of hope in terms of the things we've been able to push back, stop, challenge. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Bhavani. We'll go to Smriti for a more South Asian kind of overview.
Thanks, Ruki. And before I start, I would like to thank MSF for organizing the space. We are talking about reclaiming spaces. I think this is the first step for reclaiming spaces, to create a space to have conversations around how we safeguard civil society. I think Marvi and Bhavani gave a really detailed overview of what's happening in Pakistan and what's happening in Sri Lanka in terms of shrinking civic space. I must start, when we talk about how we safeguard civil society or how we protect civic spaces, I think it's important for us to understand the landscape in which we are working. And for that, we need to really understand that we are living in a moment today where there is a huge backsliding of human rights globally, and South Asia is no different. It even is a bit more complex for South Asia to deal with these challenges and the violations that people are facing and civil society is facing. It's because of the complexities that exist in the region. We are a diverse region. We have many cultures. We have intersectionality when it comes to religion. We have inequality, massive inequality, in a lot of countries. But one thing that really binds us is also the colonial past, and we also have these colonial legacies of laws, which a lot of which Marvi spoke about, and what Bhavani was speaking about. I think though that colonial past has also fed into the shrinking civic space. Now, when we talk about shrinking civic space, we need to also not link that conversation just with civil society, because the space is for everyone. Civil society, human rights defenders, activists are one part of it who are bearing the brunt of it. When a journalist, for instance, is targeted, it's not the human rights violations of that journalist is being targeted. It's a human rights violation of people also whose right to information has been impacted, whose right to get objective truth is impacted. When an internet ban happens, it impacts people who are not able to know what's happening, who are not able to exercise their freedom of expression. So this is something that is very common in South Asia as a region. And just to, again, go back to what Marvi and Bhavani were talking about, there is also this new trend that is building in South Asia, where countries are learning from each other. Governments are learning from each other on horrible practices of, crushing dissent. You spoke about, Bhavani, the PTA, right? We have an equivalent UAPA in India. You mentioned OSA. Bangladesh has a Digital Security Act. You talk about the national security laws, sedition, blasphemy. All of these laws are so similar that if you really pick up the book and see, the language is also the same. And now the governments and the authoritarian regimes are becoming so shameless that they openly say that we are learning from our neighbors. If this template works in, say, if a crackdown template works in Sri Lanka, why can't it work in Bangladesh? If a country can get away, if the authorities can get away with absolute impunity by use of, when they use excessive force and all, why can't in the other spaces, in other countries, this can happen? So this is really the landscape we are looking at when we talk about why we are in this situation of having this conversation about reclaiming civic spaces. The other problem that we are dealing with is, unfortunately, and I think this is something that was discussed in the last session, was about the approach of international mechanisms and international community. The geopolitics, the economics of the country, the double standards that powerful countries have shown in the recent years. Like if you look at what Russia has talked about while they have violated international human rights law and humanitarian law, what Israel has taken the stand when the atrocities in Gaza are happening. So these are the kind of things which are happening, but at the same time, closer to South Asia, what happened in Afghanistan? It's these double standards which have made us question the validity and efficacy of international mechanisms also, because that comes with this own set of geopolitics that is involved. In South Asia, it becomes really difficult because, of course, we have one neighbor that we all know which kind of dominates what's happening in the term, and then we have another neighbor which is kind of fighting with the other spaces. In that context, when we talk about civic spaces and how we protect civic spaces, I think we need to broaden that conversation beyond civil society, beyond human rights defenders, and we need to really change the narrative to have a whole of society approach. So it's not just for the civil society to find solutions to protect, for human rights defenders to fight for the right. Going back to the example that I said, that if internet is banned, it's impacting your right to information as well. So it's similarly, if a space is not provided to you to express yourself freely or to exercise your right to protest, it's going to have a far-reaching impact on every single person. And from that particular space, from that political consciousness and from that social consciousness is something that we need to really address this conversation around, reclaiming spaces, because civil society will prevail. I think civil society in some or the other form will prevail. But what about the larger human rights that we are fighting for? And just one last point, Ruki, after that, back to you, because you gave me really little time, is when, I also have a problem with shrinking civil society word. I think we need to also change the narrative to say changing civic spaces. The world is changing, regimes are changing, democracy. Right now, currently, there have been enough research which shows that there are more people living in authoritarian regimes than they did 20 years back. So democracy is actually backsliding. If you see what people were doing in 85, how many democracies in the world existed to now. So it's really, I think when we talk about reclaiming spaces, it's really for us to, as this particular group, to see where each individual can make a difference. And maybe once we go to the second round, we can discuss a bit more about how we safeguard civil society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have about 8 minutes left. So we will open up for maybe 2 or 3 comments, responses, or questions. So it'll be basically the first hands I see, the lady in the middle, and then the gentleman at the back. If you can say your name or any other form of identification, that'll be nice.
Hi, my name is Priyali Sur, and my question is to anybody in the panel who wants to take it. I think we're talking of changing civic spaces or shrinking civic spaces, changing also because a lot of the civic space has moved to social media and online, which is also being, as you all mentioned, challenged. What is the solution for journalists, human rights defenders, local humanitarian workers? Because honestly, given the work I do, there is palpable fear. And even today, I had a lot of people come and ask me, how do you manage to do what you do? And there is fear. But if a lot of INGOs are moving out, if there are laws like PTA, UAPA, how far are we going to stay protected and safe? So, is there a solution?
The gentleman at the back.
My name is Ravi. I wanted to talk about the second part, which is the reclaiming of spaces. And I wanted to understand panelists' view on use of traditional media, which I feel is very powerful. If we look at theater groups in Karachi or in various parts of India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, anywhere else, and some of the other traditional media sources, which have mobilized a large portion of our societies, civil society. How do they see their role and how one can promote it further?
Right. Okay, thank you. I think we have a possibility for one or two others. Again, a gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Zahid Aman. So I'm going to ask this question from an MSF perspective because I'm currently working with MSF South Asia. So this is mainly for, I think, Bhavani and Ruki. Especially, how do you think MSF South Asia can help build resilience for civil society in Sri Lanka, especially since we are also having shrinking or changing civic space with the online safety bill and the anti-terror law? How do you think MSF as a global organization and we, MSF South Asia, how can we help build resilience for civil society in making them, especially in building humanitarian and medical health emergencies in Sri Lanka?
Okay, thank you. Any others? Last chance. After that, we'll ask the panelists for concluding remarks. Yes, gentleman in the middle. Please use the microphone, and if you can introduce yourself.
I'm Dr. Prithviraj from Humanitarian International Lanka. And just about the narratives you're talking about, different actors, as you said, they do write their narratives. Certain narratives are very powerful actors. Sometimes the question that I would like to ask is, what is the role does the media representation play in shaping the public perspective? Because if the public perspective is going to support the powerful narratives, then you are losing the whole thing. Because on one hand, yes, there has to be protection for women, human rights defenders. That's obvious, but that's going to take some time. But certainly public perception and the public narrative should be really considered. So how far that CSOs can really work adequately with the media to really have a public perspective.
Right. Thank you, Doctor. Right. So this time maybe we will. This will also be the concluding remarks. So maybe a minute each because we took quite a lot of time for the first inputs. So a minute each to respond to any of the questions or comments that were raised. Don't worry if you can't respond to everything. So maybe we'll start with Smriti, Bhavani, and then Mavi at the end. 1 minute each, please. You can see the clock ticking here.
I'll keep an eye. Wow, these are very interesting questions. So I think I'll go with Priyali. Priyali, you had asked that question about what do we do? I wish I had an answer to say that how we can, what is the solution? What I would say is that we need to work towards a solution. I think the first step to solution is to have these conversations. For the longest time, and I will talk about it from a South Asia perspective, for the longest time when we talk about civic spaces, civil society, it's always been internal looking, country, what kind of space exists and how we have to navigate. But now we have reached a point in the world where we need to really work on building solidarity and learning from each other. So going back to the point where I was saying governments are learning from each other about horrible practices, why can't we as civil society start doing that to actually start learning from each other on protective ideas? I think there is a lot of information, there is a lot of knowledge that exists within the region and of course globally for civil society to create that space where we can help each other, where we can ideate, where we can innovate, and we can also create mechanisms of protection. So it's not necessary that the protection can just come from the country that you are in. The protection can come from anywhere around the world where there are like-minded people, where innovation is happening. So yeah, but that's just one part of things. I mean, I think I'm also looking for solutions, and whoever in this room finds one, I'd be happy to know about it.
Okay, sorry to disturb, Smriti. We have to move on to give the space to other panelists
Sorry,
as well.
so I can come back on the media thing later if there is time, but I'll give it to Bhavan.
So I think we'll have to take this conversation outside of this panel just to expand on some of this. But let's just say, let's look at something that happened in the last couple of months. The proposed Online Safety Act came about last year. And that generated so much debate and discussion in Sri Lanka that we had not seen before with other proposed laws. And I think one thing to take, the positive to take out of it is that there is a much more active, energized citizenry, at least in Sri Lanka. And they felt that their basic right of expression and information was going to be curtailed by this proposed law. And what we had was over 40 coming to the Supreme Court to challenge this bill. Usually it's a handful, like people like Ruki, me, a few others go to court to challenge these laws. With the OSA, what happened was over 40 came to court. That in itself is an indicator that people are more active, more worried, but also resorting to things they feel should be done to push back on these restricting spaces and rights. And what has happened since then is that they didn't stop at that. There was a lot of debate, there was a lot of pushback, there was a lot of pressure on members of parliament. So I think one of the things to look at is just learning from that, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of time to go into it, is just that we need, and this saying of eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. We have to be constantly monitoring, constantly scrutinizing, constantly challenging. And the challenging shouldn't be just left to the lawyers or the usual suspects. Everyone should do it in different ways, in a peaceful, democratic way. That's what I'm saying. But also to be aware that we have to be creative in challenging. It shouldn't just be using the usual ways of challenging. And what we saw in 2022 in Sri Lanka is that the young people, and connecting to this issue of what about using traditional methods, is art was used, street theater was used. So there are different strategies that can be used. What I'll say is we need to use everything in terms of protecting this space, but not just protecting, expanding this space. So I'll end there, but we can take it outside for more questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, Bhavani. Mavi, I don't know whether you see the clock has stopped ticking because we've run over time. So please try to limit yourself to 1 minute to respond to any of the questions or comments that were raised.
Yeah, thank you, Ruki. And I will try to restrict myself in 1 minute because I've already taken much of time. So much of what I wanted to say has already been said, thanks to Smriti and Bhavani. I would just add perspective to my suggestions or whatever my views. So the general lessons that we have learned from the recent movements, citizens movements, resistance, are we need stronger legal protections. We have to create resilient networks of support domestically and also internationally. We need effective communication strategies to resonate with the broader broader audience, and there comes your, one of the question was about the using traditional media more. So that comes in that, and we need to frame issues in a way that builds public support, whatever means we take, either we take this online space or traditional media or whatever. We need to ensure the safety of activists and journalists through digital and physical security measures. We need to plan long-term sustainability, including leadership succession, which is an issue in civil society organizations, at least in Pakistan. The continuous mobilization, we have to build our ability to adapt to changing circumstances, as has been said by Smriti earlier. What the way forward is, uh, as Smriti said earlier, that the states are learning from each other. There are copycat legislation, there are copycat policies and rules. So let's learn from each other. We have to learn strategies of resilience from each other, more networking, how to adapt these legal restrictions, what are the security protocols. Alternative funding sources are very, very important to learn, because in Pakistan, at least, I can say that the local funding sources are very limited. Actually, they are non-existent. So we are totally, totally dependent on the foreign, funding. So how to build the local resources, how to expand on the resources, etc., and understanding the importance of keeping a delicate balance between confrontation and engagement with the state, to achieve long-term sustainability of the dissenting voices. And the
Sorry,
advocacy
Mavi,
for
I think we
legal
had to wind
reform.
up.
Yeah,
Sorry
yeah, that
to
was my last point.
interrupt.
Advocacy
So
for legal
thank you
reform.
to all the panelists, and I think thank you to MSF as well for organizing this particular panel. I think this is a topic that is relevant to all. The theme for today is health and humanity, whether it's health or education or gender or environment. Civic space is something that we all need, irrespective of the area that we work on, whether we are in the humanitarian sector, development sector, working on governance, democracy. It's something that is essential for all of us. So it's good that this conversation was included even at the tail end of this day. Maybe it's better if it was at the tail end. So thank you for the panelists, and thank you for the people from the audience who also engaged, and thank you for MSF for organizing.